Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Donald Trump just became the first former U.S. president to face criminal charges. But is it prosecution or persecution? It matters. Let's get to the bottom line. Former President Donald Trump is accused of crimes in connection with a hush money payment to an adult film star before the 2016 election. The District Attorney of New York is accusing him of falsifying his business records with, quote, intent to commit another crime and conceal the commission thereof. Those are fancy words, but that's end quote. The crime in question is New York state election law, which considers it illegal to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. In court, Trump pleaded not guilty to all of the allegations. And like everything about Trump, the case has divided the nation, with his supporters accusing Democrats of playing dirty politics in the run-up to the next year's presidential election, where Trump is a leading Republican candidate. So which one is it? A justified legal case or a politically motivated witch hunt? And what's the fallout for both Republicans and Democrats? Today, we're talking with Michael Isikoff, the chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News and co-author of Russian Roulette, the inside story of Putin's war on America and the election of Donald Trump, and Michael Ricci, Republican strategist and communications director for the Republican former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Let me start off with you, Mike Isikoff, and ask you to share with our audience what is at play now. What did Donald Trump face earlier this week with regards to the indictment and arraignment he went through? And what is the process as we look forward? Where is the meat in this story?
Right. Well, I should start out by just pointing out the huge irony of this indictment. We have spent much of the last 2 years, more than 2 years now, talking about whether Donald Trump was going to be held accountable for his efforts to overthrow the results of the election of 2020 and how that led to the rampage on January 6th. And here we are with the first criminal charges against Donald Trump. And it has nothing to do with 2020. It's all about his first election in 2016. And the implication from Alvin Bragg's indictment is that
I should tell our audience that Alvin Bragg is the district attorney of New York.
Correct. Right. Correct. He is the prosecutor who brought this indictment. And the essence of the indictment is that Donald Trump falsified internal business records of the Trump Organization to cover up, to conceal the fact that he was paying hush money to a former porn star, Stormy Daniels, so that she didn't talk about an alleged sexual encounter that she had with Donald Trump 9 years earlier. Stormy Daniels was sort of shopping this story around to the news media in the closing weeks of 2016. Trump obviously was concerned that this story coming on top of the Access Hollywood video that got released on October 7th, you may recall, would add to his problems with women voters, and he didn't want it out before the election. So he arranged through his lawyer, Michael Cohen, to pay off Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet, $130,000. A shell company was set up to facilitate these payments, and Michael Cohen, the lawyer, ultimately pled guilty to federal charges of election law violations. The contention was that these payments were an election law crime because they were done for the benefit of aiding Donald Trump's campaign and wasn't disclosed as campaign expenditures are supposed to be disclosed. There is a lot of debate about this indictment, because basically the initial charge that Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, has brought here was falsifying business records. Standing alone under New York State Penal Code, that is a misdemeanor. But Bragg's prosecutors have bumped it up to a felony under the theory that because it was being used to conceal another crime, the election law violation, that makes it a Class E felony, Class E being the lowest form of felony, but it is a felony for which somebody convicted can go to prison for up to 4 years. There are 34 felony counts in this indictment. That's for each and every entry and check that was done to make those payments to Michael Cohen. It's really the same crime repeated 34 times in the indictment. And so that makes it sound quite serious. But as I said, there's a lot of debate about this indictment. It is a bit of a Rube Goldberg-esque bank shot, felonious records to cover up another crime, and we'll see whether it stands up. But certainly it's given fodder for all sides. Those who don't like Donald Trump to say, here, he's finally being held accountable for something that he did to get him elected in the first place in 2016, and a lot of others, Republicans, but not just Republicans, a lot of independents and legal scholars are raising questions about whether this is going to ultimately hold up.
Well, let me ask, thank you very much for that, but let me ask Michael Ricci, is there a gap here that we're not paying attention to between laws on the books and norms that people think, hey, that's okay if President Trump did this? There's no legal infraction here that we care about.
Well, Steve, I think that's something that President Trump specializes in, is widening that gap. And it's funny, you framed a question to Mike as looking forward, but all we have to do is look back to see we've been through this before so many times, where he talks about American carnage and talks about weaponization of the federal government, and Republicans, we rationalize his behavior, we say what we need to say to studiously avoid the ire of his base, and in so doing, stretch the definition of norms and customs. And with these legal cases, especially public corruption cases, you can pick them apart, you can get into the weeds, but the bottom line is that the groupthink on this was already set in well before anybody even saw the indictment about how this is a political prosecution.
But Mike Isikoff, I want to ask you about some of the other cases that are out there that are facing Donald Trump, in a special counsel investigation about January 6th, about classified documents, about meddling in Georgia. Can you share with our audience some of the other legal arenas right now that Donald Trump is facing?
Right, exactly, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people who do want Donald Trump to be held accountable are somewhat disappointed that this case, which involves events in the 2016 election, is the first criminal case that he's faced, because these other 3 investigations that he's facing are far more serious and are likely to register, far more with the American public. The first one to watch, and I think it is likely to be the next shoe to drop, is the Georgia investigation by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis into Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the election in Georgia in 2020. We've all heard about, for more than 2 years now, the famous phone call that he made to Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, asking him to find just enough votes, one more than we need, to put him over the top. But there's a lot else that Fani Willis has been digging into: the fake elector scheme that was done in Georgia, the blatantly false testimony that Rudy Giuliani gave to the Georgia legislature, and a lot of other shenanigans that went on by Trump and his allies to pressure Georgia officials to change the results of the election. So look for that. I think by the summer, we're going to see criminal charges there. And then, of course, there's the 2 special counsel investigations by Jack Smith, one into the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago that were discovered. That's an obstruction case right now. Trump was subpoenaed to return these documents that he took with him from the White House. He failed to do so. The FBI did a search. They found lots more material, highly classified. So did Trump himself direct that those classified documents not be returned to the government the way they were supposed to? That's number one. And then, of course, the big one is January 6th. and whether Trump's actions leading up to the events of January 6th caused the violence that occurred that day. And those are very active, ongoing investigations. Jack Smith just won a big victory, a couple of big legal victories in requiring testimony from Mark Meadows and other senior White House officials. He just today the news broke that former Vice President Pence is not going to appeal the judicial ruling that would force him to testify in that investigation. So there's a lot of heavy firepower behind Jack Smith's investigation. It's going, it seems there's a lot of activity, but if you factor in all the people who are going to have to testify before he can conclude this investigation, I think it's going to take more time. So we got the Fani Willis thing coming up, May, June, possibly July, and then the Jack Smith stuff. So the bottom line is, no matter what he says and no matter how people feel about it, Donald Trump is going to have to be spending a lot of time in a lot of courtrooms, even while he's running for president.
Well, Mike Ricci, one of the things that has surprised me, and maybe I don't have the full story, is that one can be a convicted criminal and still be elected president of the United States, still serve as president of the United States. You know almost all of the other candidates out there, including your former boss was thought of as a potential candidate for president. How do you think they're hearing what Mike Isikoff just shared? Because my sense is that from the moment Donald Trump's private estate was raided by the FBI, and also from the moment when he announced himself, in fact, we've got this statement we can show up right now where it reads, the far and away leading Republican candidate and former president of the United States of America will be arrested on Tuesday of next week. Protests take our nation back. Almost as if he wanted this to happen because it fueled the engines beneath his campaign and brought him back to life, if you will. So what's going on among senior Republicans that are vying for the White House?
I think you're always trying to recalibrate, especially in terms of your schedule. I mean, I was looking at, Nikki Haley this week, for instance. She was at the border on Monday. She released her fundraising report today. It's almost a bizarro world where those are all in their own impressive and strong messages, but how much oxygen is that really getting? So it was almost like a preview of what we're going to see in the months to come, where these candidates will be trying to do, your standard political things, go do rallies and go to Iowa, go to New Hampshire, hold town halls, while you have this spectacle that's ongoing. And there was a time not too long ago when, President Trump, we were only seeing him, grainy photos at Mar-a-Lago. Maybe he went to somebody's wedding and stopped by and said hello, or we heard about a dinner he was having with Matt Gaetz or some member of Congress. And now all he has to do is announce a rally, and he can suck back all that oxygen. So I think for those candidates, there's figuring out how to carry on their own schedules, but also, Steve, it's the constant pressure, and obviously Governor DeSantis is experiencing this. Everything you say is measured against, you're either asked about Trump or you're measured against what you're saying vis-a-vis Trump. And, there's just not a universe. I experienced this in the governor's office where you can say, I'm going to go about my business, day after day and try not to comment on it. It worked for Mitch McConnell for a time when the president was in office, but it's very difficult to do that. The media, because if you don't answer those questions, then it's, look what's happening with Vice President Pence. He's sort of getting measured against what he's trying to say, and he's trying to carry on his own message. So it's a constant struggle.
I'd love to get your insights into that, Mike Isikoff, and find out from you whether you think there is some dimension of fear, uncertainty, and wobbliness in the posture that Donald Trump is presenting right now.
All you had to do was look at him yesterday. He in those images of him in the court, walking into the courtroom and in the courtroom, he was somber. He was, not at all happy to be where he was. He had advertised, or his people had advertised, he was going to make comments at the courthouse. He did no such thing. Somebody who was watching him closely yesterday said he seemed rattled and he seemed diminished. by the whole process. Now, once he got back to Mar-a-Lago, he got back into his comfort zone and gave that speech, firing off shots at everybody left and right, Bragg, Fani Willis, Jack Smith, and, hit back all the, his favorite litany of imagined abuses. Anybody watching him yesterday knows that he's not happy about this predicament that he's in. And I should add, you asked about Nikki Haley before. This is a train wreck for the Republican Party because this indictment has rallied Republicans behind Trump. He's surging in the polls. He's shot well ahead of DeSantis, in part because it is a controversial indictment. It doesn't feel like the kind of a criminal charge that we should be bringing for the first time against a former president, that there ought to be more gravitas to the alleged criminal conduct here than this sort of tawdry series of events involving a porn star. But the attacks on Bragg may have some traction right now, but when Fani Willis comes in and charges far more serious offenses that will register with the public, it's going to be a lot harder for Trump to maintain this idea that he's the victim of political persecution. And the Republican Party seems to be stuck with him because there is no other candidate right now. DeSantis seemed like he was the guy. He was Trumpy, but not Trumpist, and therefore he could appeal to the Trump base, but he wasn't Donald Trump himself. But he hasn't stepped up to the plate in these last couple of months. There's serious questions as whether he has, the goods to be a presidential candidate on a national stage, and Trump is sucking up the oxygen. So the Republicans are in a incredible bind here because they really don't want Donald Trump to be their standard bearer in 2024 to be against Joe Biden, but they may be stuck with him.
Yeah, well, like Mike Ricci, I listen carefully to what people say, and I'd like us to listen for a moment to a sound clip we have of Donald Trump speaking at Mar-a-Lago. Let's listen to President Trump.
Incredibly, we are now a failing nation. We are a nation in decline. And now these radical left lunatics want to interfere with our elections by using law enforcement. We can't let that happen.
Mike Ricci, if you take that bit of commentary and you detach it from all the bombs he fired at all the people that Mike Isikoff just shared, that statement resonates with a lot of Americans. It resonates with Mitt Romney, who is a big Donald Trump critic in the Republican Party. It resonates across the board. I'd just be interested in how people that you know well in the Republican Party, many pragmatic Republican, reasonable Main Street Republicans are my guests, how are they feeling this moment? And do they see his commentary like that as a solvent critique of America today?
Well, I think the difference, Steve, from 2016 is that President Trump, the rhetoric is somewhat familiar, but back in 2016, he was at least presenting some semblance of a platform. There was a time that all of us in Republican circles were trying to recreate, what's our, he's talking about building the wall, and we used to say for years, what's the next build the wall, because it was so ingenious and it rallied people and it was a solution to a problem. And now it's just straight, raw grievance politics, and he injects it right into the veins of his base, so to speak. And for Republicans, it makes it hard to present any kind of credible alternative or positive platform to get independent and suburban voters back. But you mentioned Mitt Romney, and I wanted to talk about that briefly. I think to Mike's previous answer about the upcoming investigations, you could definitely see a universe where Senator Romney or people like Senator Romney are trying to preserve their ability when more serious charges to come out and say, look, this is the serious thing. This is the thing that serious Republicans need to rally behind and say, this is serious. He can't be our standard bearer anymore. So I'm not saying he's playing politics there, but there may be a universe in where it's, yeah, this is questionable, but this is serious. The problem there, Steve, is in my experience, people will be saying to you quietly behind the scenes, oh yeah, you go say it, you call on him to drop out of the race, and then people see what happens to those, early voices who try to, like Asa Hutchinson, I guess, right now, who try to speak out, and it can be a very lonely journey, so to speak.
Well, look, we all live in Washington, D.C. We've got a big global audience listening to this right now. My friend Mike Isikoff is plugged in every corner of this town. And, Mike, I got to just be honest with the public that at cocktail parties in Washington, D.C., the chatter is who else will succeed. If Donald Trump is eventually forced out one way or another out of the election, and then you look at the Democratic equation where Joe Biden says he's going to run, he's revving up to run. There's just a lot of doubt in Democratic circles that he will run. What do you have in America? I mean, what is that chaos going to be healthier than the two choices we might otherwise have?
I mean, look, every there's the cocktail party chatter in Washington in which the cognoscente always believes they got a pretty good handle on how things are going to play out in a presidential race. This one is as unpredictable as any I've ever been through and watched. I can give you 10 plausible scenarios how all this plays out, and they're all equally possible. From Donald Trump being criminally convicted and going to prison to Donald Trump being elected again as president of the United States. Does Joe Biden, actually run? I mean, he's giving every indication he's going to run. A lot of, behind the scenes, Democrats are nervous about that. He's an octogenarian to serve as president for another 4 years when he will be, 85? By the last year of his presidency, that's makes a lot of people queasy. And then, of course, you have the Kamala Harris issue as to whether she's up for succeeding him as president. But no Democrat is going to talk about this publicly right now. I've talked to a lot of senior Democrats who will say, yeah, Biden will say he's going to run, and then at some point down the road, before the end of the year or early next year, conclude that he was not going to run after all, in which case it's a total freefall in the Democratic Party. But if he doesn't do that, and he stays healthy enough, he will be the nominee, and Kamala Harris will be the vice presidential nominee as well.
Well, I love this conversation. It went a lot of new corners, and I hope you'll both be back. Veteran journalist Michael Isikoff and Republican strategist Michael Ricci, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So what's the bottom line? Well, how sacred is a former president supposed to be? In France or Korea, it's really normal for former heads of state to be dragged into court. In the United States, it's just never happened before. Trump, as usual, has broken the mold and proved that a former president, well, is just a normal citizen. Of course, the sleaziness of his alleged behavior adds spice to this case. Business fraud is an everyday thing, but allegedly paying hush money to adult film stars is kind of out there. So the court will decide if Trump's alleged fraud is tied to his dreams of becoming president back in 2016, but the trial could be tied up in motions and appeals for years. My gut sort of tells me that many Americans just aren't going to buy that this is the sort of criminal offense he should be convicted of. And by the way, the whole process isn't hurting him at all. It's fueling his campaign and his reemergence as the most powerful Republican in America. And that's the bottom line.